Hey, I'm Jacob Cooperman, and you were watching the MMA Conspiracy Hour with Todd Atkins and Miguel Iturrate. Todd has been involved in covering combat sports since the 1990s, and Miguel has match-made over 200 different events amongst various promotions worldwide. Please subscribe and be on the lookout for future episodes. As for me, you can check me out at Gloves Up on YouTube and Coop TV with 3 O's on Instagram. Thank you guys, and enjoy the episode.
All right, so it's Todd Atkins. I'm here with Miguel Iturrate again. Always awesome to do shows with Miguel, the backbone of our channel. And as always, people who like this stuff. If you're here watching this, obviously you like MMA, and subscribe, support our channel. Got some merchandise that I linked and everything. Check it out. And just share the stuff if you like it. All those kind of things. And Miguel. The thing that's fresh in my mind right now is I just saw Adesanya get stopped, almost knocked out, but, he got TKO'd. And what's on my mind is, so he got stopped by this guy, Imavov. Got stopped by Duplessis, a fight that he was looking good in, just like this one. Pereira almost TKO'd him again, but, he caught him. The fight before that, Pereira did stop him. And, I think he had one other fight. I think he's been stopped in like 3 of his last 4 fights, or maybe 4 of his last.
Well,
five.
he's 1-4 in his last 5.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. So my feeling is, it looks like maybe he can't take the punch anymore.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think, to me, as a long-time observer of this stuff, I almost feel like once you've gotten caught once, like you may have an iron chin for many fights throughout your career. And like, for example, the guy that fought Page looks to have a brick head. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Shara.
But he's a young man, and I think youth has a little bit to play in it with instincts and speed and things like that. And the fact is Adesanya is now mid to late 30s. And this is a young man's sport, especially with this generation of guys that have been practicing the sport since they were 12, 13, 14 years old and working on their skills. They arrive at 22, 24 total package kind of thing. And that's going to be hard for an older person to beat, especially when they're a little slow. And Adesanya, he looked fit. He's always been a very good athlete. And
he looks sharp. His kicks and punches look fast.
Yeah, a very elusive athlete, but some of that, but I think once you've been knocked out once, to throw that iron head out the window, and that you're always going to be more susceptible to it, and be careful. And we've seen it over and over. Chuck Liddell, once he went down one time, started to roll for him. Another guy who extended his career by learning how to fight a lot smarter, but showed that pin susceptibility at some point was Arlovsky, for example. You'd start to see guys get caught, and I think that's what happened here. I could see his point. I think Adesanya was actually in a safe position when they stopped the fight. It might have been an early stoppage. I'm not somebody who's going to just go all in on, it was early, it was not a good, but it might have been an early stoppage. He had managed to get onto his belly, and he had his head covered up, and the punches that were coming his way didn't look all that lethal. Like he could have been clearing his head a little bit. By the time he got up and he punched the floor, it looked like he knew what was going on. When he went down, it looked bad, and when he caught the second punch while he was on his knee, it looked bad. But I think he reacted well, and I think you could have let it go on. And I'm not sure that he wouldn't have survived that round. And then we can see what happened. I think, like I said, I'm not one who says, "Oh, that's a bad stop. It's a bad stop." It might have gone wrong for him because he was already going to be a little slower, and the other guy might have just caught him and really flattened him. So he may have been saved a real ugly knockout in round 3 or later in round 2 if it was stood up or somehow. Um, but yeah, I can almost see Adesanya's point, but he didn't used to go down like that, and you see guys that constantly get. It's like a train, Once you get the first knockout, the other uh, train cars follow, and he's 35, so he's done. Not done, but he's done from the title picture. Now he becomes, you know, a marginal guy, and for a guy like him who's been at the top for a long time, a two-time champion, stuff like that, not being in the title picture, a lot of what he talked about in the build-up to this fight was motivation. Well, at 1-4, you're gone from the title picture. Um, so how are you going to get motivated for a mid-level, mid-card fight? Maybe the money will be there. You'll still have your contract and your paycheck, but how do you get together for a mid-level fight where, again, you're going to probably be fighting a guy 10 years younger who is going to be looking like this guy, wanting to take what you got, wanting to run you over, and has a lot more motivation to do it than you, who's going to be going through the, you know, 20th training camp of his career. And it's been 20 training camps or however many it's been since it wasn't a title fight or something meaningful to the title picture. So, yeah, I think it was unfortunate, but he's 35 years old and unless you're a heavyweight, 35, you're pretty much old in this sport.
Plus all the kickboxing fights he had before he ever
Right,
got into
right.
MMA.
And you've been knocked out on some of those. At some point, if you're young, you make adjustments and you're fast enough, your instincts are fast enough, you're getting out of the way of punches and stuff like that. But we've seen it happen in this sport. The speed and precision that you can gain is the top. Everybody says wrestling and stuff like that. I think the physical quality is the speed and precision. Speed to execute, pull the trigger right before your opponent does. Precision to be precise enough to just move out of the way with a little head move like that and not get hit. When Anderson Silva got caught by Weidman, it was the move that he'd made for 10 years failing him for the first time that we saw.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happens is at some point they're going to fail you. We saw it, for example, with a guy like Randy Couture. And Couture is that era is a different era because of the TRT and things like that. Because Couture, obviously in his 40s, came back with some assistance, I think, legal assistance probably within what the rules were then. But Couture was a guy that once he knocked some people out. He never really was a huge puncher, but he knocked some people out, and then all of a sudden, even that knockout power went, and he was forced to fight 5-round perfect fights in order to win. And with his pace and stuff, he has a shot at it. But like for example, there's no doubt in my mind that he was up in the Rico Rodriguez fight before Rico beat him. You know, I was at that fight. That was the last UFC fight I attended. Actually, it's at a two in row 4, 2 rows behind Monty Cox. um, but yeah, yeah, so that speed and precision that you count on, and then if not, then you really do have to be a guy who's going to be prepared to grind and slow the fight down, and that's not Adesanya's game. Adesanya always has to come out and press the action and kind of be exciting and stuff. And I hate to you know speak poorly or speak negatively about what was a decent performance, but we're going to see this in a few years with Michael Page.
Yep. I was about to say that right when you said this, and I didn't give Strickland credit. Strickland was the other guy who beat Adesanya. I should have mentioned him, but
And I still think Strickland knocked him out, but Strickland
yeah, he
definitely caught
almost
him, hurt
stopped him.
him.
Yep,
Yeah,
almost
caught him,
stopped him.
hurt him, and definitely ran to the end of the fight, dominating. So,
But I was thinking about Page right as you were talking. He won, but what, 10 years, 5 years ago, he would have probably knocked that guy out. He's still
yeah,
quick. He still has reflexes, but they're not as fast, and he's not as sharp.
And he was up a weight class, I think. Um, and he was still bigger than the guy he fought. So, 185 may eventually be where he's at. But I think in Page, you've got maybe the closest that you're going to see to an Anderson Silva at this point. A huge guy at 170 who operates at 185. And, Anderson was a long-time 185-pound champion. I'm not sure Page will get through the champion if he faces some of the, like the match to make for me now would be Page versus Chimaev.
I don't know if Page would won it, but yeah, it'd be a good match to make.
Well, the thing is, for example, the guy who fought, I know the guy who fought has a reputation as a striker and stuff, but Page has some MMA. Uh, he doesn't have wrestling pedigree, but he has some MMA wrestling defense and a lot of motion. And Chimaev is probably going to wind up chasing him for a little bit at least. Chimaev will be more aggressive than the guy was yesterday. The guy yesterday was a little bit afraid to take a punch coming in, and I don't think he had the ground game that he wanted to immediately ground the guy. I think he wanted to try to slug it out and do that. But again, it's a good contrast, and I think you know probably that match should have been made a couple of matches ago, but Page wasn't on the roster for that long. He had to develop and get him, adjusted to the UFC. But the more you wait, the less likely Page is to have a good performance in that fight. So the time is now.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of fights you could do, but staying on the subject of Adesanya, like obviously was a great champion, uh, and I think as we talk about the education of fans on this show, this is something that I think is important that you do. There's still a lot of guys out there who think he looked good. Dana White was even pumping him up, saying he looked great, till he got caught. But that's been his last 4 losses. He's looked great until someone caught him.
Yeah, and even there were some. I would call him. I wouldn't put him in the. He's not better than Anderson Silva was.
No.
Like, and somebody might want to make that argument or whatever. And I don't know at this point. He had a lot of title defenses and that sort of stuff, but I think that, for example, he doesn't have the mind game of the top players. So he would be a second tier, maybe top 25 of all time kind of guy in my book, which isn't a bad place to be. Maybe top 30 or whatever. I'll have to sit down and look at it, but um, yeah, but I think his mind, like for example, with the Strickland match, Strickland had that one match won before they went into the ring. I go back to when actually he fought Anderson Silva, and Anderson was already an old champion. Um, and he seemed to give there, like if you had put Chimaev in against Anderson Silva, Chimaev would have gotten the job done because Chimaev wouldn't have been intimidated or shown too much respect. That's not what was needed in that fight for Adesanya. That was a fight that could have taken him to the next level earlier in his career, but he really didn't look that great in it. It was soon after that they stopped talking about him and John Jones. If you look at Jones now too, at the size that Jones is at and stuff like that, Anderson wouldn't. I mean, Adesanya wouldn't have survived against Jones, not one bit. That wouldn't have even been a good match probably, because Adesanya doesn't have the mind game of those top guys where it's a chess match and a butcher shop at the same time. That's how some of those guys think. And John Jones is definitely one of those guys where he when it push comes to shove and he needs to turn it on and trying to kill you, he's perfectly comfortable doing that. And I never saw that kind of killer instinct in Adesanya. Strickland said enough stuff about him before that fight that would have been all motivation, a top-notch mind So Adesanya was a top-notch athlete and a second-tier mind. There's probably 10 tiers of mind. I'm not saying Adesanya was weak-minded or anything like that at all. I mean, he was on top for so long and had 2 title reigns and things. But I'm saying that that's what keeps him out of all-time greats or all-time great middleweight conversations. You know, you probably count a handful of middleweights. Um, I prefer having their career to Adesanya's.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think the other thing is not just the chin aspect, but also he's more hittable now than he was earlier, as he on
Yeah,
his rise.
that's it. That's where I point back to ancient MMA history, but we saw it happen, and the first time I saw it happen, it was very noticeable, was with Ruben Asado in Shudo. The guy was unbelievably athletic in ways that we had never seen. I mean, 6 second flying arm bars on world class wrestlers, and um, the speed and precision that he had was unbelievable. And it's not even really noticeable to the human eye when that precision falls off just a little bit. It's noticeable in the competition though, because they start getting caught. And Sato is a guy now that if you look at his record, I think they overfought him. I think he probably fought himself into about a 500 record in his career.
Yeah.
And that completely discredits what he was in the first 20 fights of his career, where he was absolutely, it was him and Frank Shamrock were the two best in the world. And Rumina was probably pound for pound better than Frank, but Frank was just bigger and able to operate in the UFC, whereas they didn't have 155 and 145 pounders back in those days. But Sato was the first guy. Once he got caught, then his mind started to maybe have some doubts and stuff. And he still put out instructional videos and things like that about the precision exercises he did that were insane exercise videos and conditioning videos and things, especially for the time. The guy was a machine by every standard, but he lost shred of a step. And that's all the real top guys need to catch you. And Adesanya, I agree with you completely, looks to have lost that shred of a step that gave him an edge. Page may have lost a little bit too, but Page still showed that he can stay one step ahead of a top competitor.
Yeah, the other thing about Adesanya when you say Sean Strickland, Dricus Duplessis, this guy Imamov, Pereira's on his level as a striker. No one doubts that. But the other guys, no one felt like that they were on his level. But these are the guys who knocked him down. These are the guys who, they were all able to do that, find that one
Yeah,
punch they needed.
yeah, and the thing about Adesanya is, and he's got some knockouts in his career and stuff, but I think he was a little bit more of a stylish striker. So he's got a lot of style, but not that much pop. Whereas I think Strickland is more of a boxer, and I think Strickland does the basic things that he does really well. If you put him in the boxing game, I don't think he'd do that well. But for MMA, he's really refined what he does, and his pressure. And again, that was an act of mindset. When he hurt Adesanya in their fight, he never let up. He knew he'd hurt him. Had Walgas, a lightweight boxing champion from the turn of the last century, 1910, said the single best quality that a fighter can have is knowing when you've hurt your opponent. And I think that's important because there are guys that miss. Oh shit, I hurt him, and they miss an opportunity. There's some guys that hurt him and back off thinking I'll get him again later, and they don't. So you have to know and analyze and know how to handle that. And I think Strickland, that's what won Strickland that fight, as well as having gotten into his head before the fight. Um, and yeah, that's where Adesanya is a notch below some of the top middleweights and killers of all time there.
Now you were a matchmaker of a ton of shows. We just talked about Venom Page fighting Shara. Um, what did you think about? I mean, where do you go with him after he lost to Page? Because he's obviously a guy UFC was pushing in that region.
Yeah, I unfortunately, I would, and I think you've got a hardworking guy there, just like all those types of Eastern European guys, that are good soldiers and are willing to work for the company. But I would move him down the line a little bit, only because, you know, and I like his story. I realize he said some things along the line of, obviously from a poor background, and he bought a house and a car that he hasn't even been in yet because he's been working on his training camps, and he's a serious fighter, and you've got the makings of a good soldier there. But I think as the UFC at the UFC's level, you do have to analyze um the dependence on Eastern Europeans on your roster. So when you get a guy that's got caught a little short, I think he's going to have to work a little extra harder, maybe, win 2 or 3 fights or something before you're talking about him in the title picture again. Whereas he would have been in the title picture with probably if he had beaten Page with his winning streak and everything. Um, so yeah, I think that they have two men. The guy that beat Adesanya, that was unfortunate because I know he's from France. That's not quite Eastern European, but he's also Muslim, Eastern Europe, Muslim, like Khabib, like those guys and stuff like that. And that type of person comes from a poor background and is given an opportunity to make money and make a career in sport, and also in their cultures earn a respect that's a little different. Chris Weidman, I'm sure, is respected as an MMA fighter in New York, but not at the level where like people are throwing money and gifts at you and want to rub shoulders with you. There's still lawyers, New York lawyers, that look down on Chris as just an athlete kind of thing. You know what I mean? We have a very different society than there. Those guys instantly move to the top of the food chain in respect for breaking through internationally and stuff. And that's going to be hard for over time. It's going to be hard for this sport to not look like a Eastern European type of sport if the UFC doesn't do a good job of managing these guys. They gave this guy a push. The guy now didn't take the next step. So I think not to the back of the line kind of thing, but I think now he needs a couple of dormant fights where he's fighting guys younger than him, his age, that have less of a name than him, and he's got his name at risk with them.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about that a little bit. It might be even that the UFC has to stay away from signing some fighters from that area
Yep.
because once you have too many, and I talked about this a little bit on another show with Michael Hansen. It's almost like I was talking about the Moneyball thing. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Moneyball with Brad Pitt. You have to watch it. It's a really great movie. Brad Pitt, he was playing the Billy Bean, who was the Oakland A's GM,
Okay.
and they had lost several guys. Jason G, or yeah, Jason Giambi, he was the best first
Okay.
baseman in baseball at the time. Almeida was a player they lost, and the guy they lost to Boston. I'm trying to remember his name. They lost 3 All-Star caliber players at the same time,
That's
and
pretty modern era. I mean, that's not 50 years ago.
yeah, but they decided to go more in a direction of analytics based, where if we can find guys that like maybe 3 guys that have the same on base percentage as these guys, they may not be as good players. They may not even be close. But if they can get on base as much as these 3 guys, same percentage, that'll be, maybe we can do something. And they did. They had a lot of success that year, and they won like 20 games in a row, which was, had broke a AL record, I think. But anyway, what I
One
was
second,
getting
one
at,
second.
okay. All right, so what I was getting at, there's a scene in there where he's asking his scouts, what's the problem? They were talking about they had guys that they were ready to replace him with, free agents, players in their farm league, so on and so forth. And they're talking about these different guys, and he's saying you guys aren't looking at the problem. The problem is there's teams that have money and teams that don't. Rich teams and poor, and we're one of those. So we have to think differently. And I think MMA is starting to get to that problem where it's a Eastern European problem. They're better than, I'd say per capita, and the majority of them are better
Absolutely has to
than the other athletes from the other countries, our country and other
absolutely
countries.
has to do with my here's
Yeah,
it absolutely has to do with money in the UFC's pay structure and everything like that. So
yeah,
what we have now is we have guys that get fight their way and are good, so they get to the top level, and then they go off and go to ATT or Greg Jackson and the schools, and they're not even as prevalent as they used to be.
nope,
Why? Because the money's not really there to keep that thing floating. They would, of course, they signed John Jones and trained John Jones because Jones can pay 20%, and that 20% is very nice, or 10%, whatever the percentage is on Jones's salary is a very comfortable living for those guys. But what you don't see is you don't see what we used to see in the old days of the sacrifice of a team that's training a guy from scratch, kind of rolling the dice, because right now, if you don't make it and you top off at making 20 and 20, those trainers aren't making the money that they've made. Again, the same effect I've always talked about with fighters. Once a trainer's made big money off a fighter, what's his incentive to keep training the next generation?
mm,
Then they maybe become more dedicated to a gym, the overall gym package, fitness and things like that make you money. So the structure of the uh, taking care of your trainers through the fighters and through the fighters' pay is what has killed the event. And also, the fighters, I don't want to knock, because it really isn't their responsibility, but I'm surprised in a way that you haven't seen, like, for example, Pat Miletich nurtured a generation after him. But you don't see a lot of guys nurturing a generation after him. Where's Frank Mir's top student? Where's, you know, Andre Arlovsky's top student? Where is you go down the line, where's Matt Serra's top student? Where's George St. Pierre's top student? Maybe if you consider George St. Pierre, maybe he helped train Rory McDonald for a little bit, stuff like that. So then where's Rory McDonald's top student?
yep,
Where's where are these guys? Where is the infrastructure of them bringing along the next generation? It's not there. Why? Because they made some money, and then that shows when you go back there, and the fighter's works his way through the underground or through the minor shows where you don't even care, and works their way to the UFC, is making 10-10, wins his fight 20,000. You're going to make $4,000 for a full 6-week training camp and things like that. The structure, that's what really shows that the money is still not up to speed in the sport. There's no second generation. Meanwhile, 10-10 for an Eastern European guy is worth it. And those coaches still live, again, and these are guys in general. We'll point to Khabib's team where they are really, I guess the word might be devout Muslims. So they don't have the lifestyle problems of alcohol and women and Vegas and gambling. You could tell Khabib hated Vegas. He just found it that the you know yeah, he'd agree it's Sin City, but whereas most Americans agree Sin City's cool and party, he didn't think it was cool at all. He'd much rather fight in Abu Dhabi, where at least there's a veneer of Muslims that don't drink and don't have lifestyle issues like that. And the coaches are probably the same type of way, and they've lived poor their whole life. So $4,000 for them on a guy, 20% on a guy making 20 and 10 and 10 to 20%, 20,000 on his first win in the UFC. They'll just take that and put it in the bank and pay their bills for a few months. So the money is still good for Eastern Europeans, and that's another indication that the UFC's slanted that way in order to maximize their profits, because those guys work for cheap. It's the same way that we buy T-shirts now that are made in Pakistan and made in Bangladesh, because the people putting them together are working for much cheaper than a guy who works, in a sweatshop in Tennessee or whatever, or even China at this point is we there's a lot of made in China plastic goods and stuff like that, and the clothes on the high end sometimes get made there. But like your average T-shirts and stuff like that are no longer even made there. They've gone to another location for the sake of profit. And that's what you see. That's the main problem with why the UFC continues to sign these guys is it's for the sake of profit. They come to a guy with a 10-10 offer, and an American looks at it and goes, I've been selling tickets on my local show. I've been making, 10, 12,000 plus my local sponsors. I've been making $20,000 a fight already. You're not, and the UFC literally says, we don't care. We'll just get another guy. And inevitably, that's what's led to this switch to the roster because those are the guys, even at the top level. To me, once he became a star and stuff like that, I think Dana's on the record as saying Khabib never, here's X for the fight. Khabib never said X plus Y. He always said X. Okay, thanks. No negotiations, no stress, low maintenance, because they work for cheap. That's what you see with these guys. They work for cheap and bring amazing quality also.
Yeah, the other thing I think is the people from our country and maybe Canada, some of these, they've left the sport with a bad taste in their mouth for some reason. They don't want to train
Well,
other people. Frank Shamrock doesn't want to train anyone else to be successful. Frank Mir doesn't want, GSP doesn't want to. All these guys have left the sport and they're not happy with, you know.
some of them, like GSP, I think is probably living comfortably. Frank, if he's living comfortably, it's not from his MMA money. Frank Mir probably towards the end of his career maybe managed to score some, but when he's looking at what guys are making and things like that, yeah, those guys were not compensated well enough during their career, and that bitterness extends itself. And then on top of that, the paydays even go down further if you're dedicated to training people. And again, and here's the other part of it is at the level the sport's at now, you can't just be a part-time trainer. You have to be a full-time trainer to get a guy to the top level. And that's what you see in Eastern Europe is those guys are dedicating themselves as full-time trainers. They're not worried about, well, I can't, I'm going to give this class to one of the students to run because I got to do cardio kickboxing over here for the ladies.
Yeah.
That's not the way gyms in Dagestan run. So yeah, I think this has to do. This can only be fixed if the lawsuits against the UFC and their monopoly type of thing do somehow break through, so that the compensation level is there in some different way. That you're nurturing the infrastructure. The idea of the UFC training centers isn't as prevalent anymore as it was a long time ago.
That's a good
Why?
Point. That's a good point.
Why? Because it topped off, and then to regenerate that would have taken an influx of money, a pay raise for the guys. So Frank Mir made $1 million for a fight. That's just theoretical, right? He made $1 million for a fight, took home 400,000 after paying the bills, taxes, and paying everybody else. And now you're going to ask him to train a guy for 6 weeks for 4,000 for 1% of what he was making. So there had to be some different way with compensating and sharing the money that the UFC is pocketing with the structure of the sport. And what you see now with the states is a dearth of it. Only guys that have an extreme passion for the sport are even dedicated enough to try it.
Yeah, also the cultural thing, like you were saying, that you can elevate your status in society significantly in those areas. As to where here,
Yeah,
if you're a great fighter, no, the overall populace doesn't
yeah,
care.
I think they don't care. And if you're a great fighter, you manage to get to the breakthrough. Like for example, I'll go to the boxing world, and a guy like Ryan Garcia. Many of Ryan Garcia, like I think Ryan Garcia probably gets a nice check from YouTube and Instagram every week or every month because he's got a very large social media following, right? But I present to you that a lot of those people are probably girls that think he's handsome and that might watch a couple of rounds of him fighting, and uh, you know, but they're not watching boxing like who's going to be his next competition. Oh, I saw his next fight is who? Oh, okay, I seen that guy fight too. That doesn't exist with most of Ryan Garcia's following. The followings in the States are very artificial. In MMA, it's almost, you hear the jokes about the WNBA, but in MMA, it's really a lot like the WNBA, where it's like you hear about maybe the top few names and things like that, because that's what the UFC keeps pumping your head with, full of. And you got guys maybe like Sean Strickland who keep their names out there prevalently. So they're putting in and grinding in the social media aspect as well as in the gym, and that's what you get. But not everybody is capable of doing that. For example, Bryce Mitchell.
Yeah, we'll get to him later. But I think this is an interesting topic because, like I said, I kind of broached it with Michael Hansen. But I think, and one of the other things I would say is like Chimaev's a classic example. Chimaev got really sick, got COVID. I think he was getting treated in Sweden, maybe somewhere. And, he put out on Instagram that he was going to retire. I think it was just a frustration thing, but he was really
Well,
sick. He showed pictures of him. He looked like he was in bad shape. And what happened? Kadyrov called him up and said, why didn't you call me? Come home. I'll get you the best treatment. I'll take care of everything. We'll get you back. All you have to do in return is continue to fight. That was the deal.
yeah, and that's kind of, you go back to the complaint of the wrestlers like Daniel Cormier saying, the Russians or this, that, or the other thing. That's always been the problem with sports at certain levels in the States, like American boxing, American wrestling. It's amateur programs that are not funded by the government, right? So if they are funded by the government, it's minor funding, like, facilities and things like that, but not athlete salaries. So yeah, yeah, that is an encouragement. So we probably have a lot of wrestlers that didn't try MMA because they're not going to try it for 2 and 2, you know. Um, when you've seen guys jump in maybe inappropriately, guys that didn't have the mindset for it, because they were big names and they got offered big money for, or at least relatively big money for a few fights or whatever. But you probably have a Coleman was never a gold medalist, but you probably got a lot of guys at that right on the verge of a gold medalist that also have that mean streak, that also have that mindset, also will punch your face in a bar if it comes to it. Didn't have that mindset. That's what separated him. Another guy, the guy that came to mind that took a few fights for money, was Rulon Gardner. Rulon was not a fighter. That guy never fought before in his life. And, he did what he did in MMA based on his wrestling and based on his physical size and capabilities.
And Cole
But
Conrad in Bellator, same thing. Remember Cole
yeah,
Conrad had a lot
yeah,
of
he
success.
had gotten himself to undefeated. And I interviewed what was this guy?
Similar
Travis
kind
View.
of build to Rulon, kind of look kind of like
Yeah,
Rulon
yeah,
physically, yeah.
yeah. I interviewed Travis View, and Travis View is a guy with 80 professional fights and a guy who achieved a lot in the sport. Um, and Travis was working on Brock Lesnar, and he's from up in that area, and he was working with Brock in some of Brock's training camps. Travis is a huge heavyweight. Brock needs bodies and stuff. And Travis View didn't even blink. He said the best wrestler in the room was Conrad,
Yeah.
bar none. Well, with Lesnar there, you know what I mean? So, yeah. So, but he's the guy who didn't like it, and you always wonder if his paychecks had been 500,000 instead of 50,000, would he have stayed? Probably. You can convince yourself maybe that would. Then the mindset thing becomes the difference between being a longtime champion or a champion that retains your title 10 times and gets up for those fights, as opposed to a guy who does slip a little bit. But yeah, we've lost some wrestlers, and some people who won't compete. Even guys like Ryan Gordon, why hasn't
Gordon
he
Ryan,
dabbled
Gordon,
in?
Gordon
Yeah,
Ryan, Gordon Ryan. You always mess it up.
Ryan Gordon. But yeah, I always mess it up. But the point is why hasn't he dabbled yet? Maybe it's a mindset thing, but he's probably also because of sponsorships and things gotten himself to a comfortable income in jujitsu and would risk it going into the UFC and somehow loses, because the guy gets lucky and blasts him in the face. So why? But if he were to debut with a healthy paycheck that is based on what he's already done in another sport, and they don't say, well, jiu-jitsu is not MMA, so you got to start at 10-10, or however they're handling those negotiations. But there are a lot of guys with talent that we haven't seen in this sport. Actually, Dana is on record as saying he's working on a match that's going to catch everybody by surprise. He
It's not.
expects it to happen in the fall, and we'll see. We'll see what he pulls out of a hat, and what athlete he actually brings in from another sport. And again,
I
the
don't think he
sport's
is.
so
I think most people think it's going to be Topuria Makachev. That Topuria is going to move up and fight Makachev.
okay. Okay, and that could be interesting. That could be interesting. I'll take Makachev in that one,
Yeah.
unless Makachev is starting to enjoy the money and gets a shred of softness. But if he stays as hungry and as hard as he is now, he's a bigger man. He's going to win.
Yeah. It's interesting. Also, like Chimaev said in an interview, I think the Nelk guys had him, and he said that, like Kadir's already given him 3 cars, like 3 Mercedes.
Yeah,
And it's like what you're saying. These guys, we'd probably see more guys from Chechnya if we hadn't sanctioned the Kadyrov, because he has his own team, his own gym, his own promotion, Akhmat.
yeah.
I think Hamzat kind of got around that because when he left Chechnya and was living in another country, now he could kind of work with the UFC. But yeah, we probably see a lot more guys from that area too, if you know, because they definitely
If
have
we're,
the incentive. And what he was
if
telling
we're
Hamzat when he brought him in, he said, "I'll get the best doctors from Russia. We'll come down here. We'll get you well. You don't have cancer, like they were telling him he might have." He's like, "No,
if
no,
world politics were different, we
yeah,
would have UFC Chechnya 19 this weekend
yeah,
and UFC Moscow 44 next weekend.
yeah." And what he was telling him was, it's so important what you're doing for the country, for the people, to inspire people here. We'll get you well. I'll pay for all of that. Whatever you need. All you have to do in return is continue to compete. That's it.
Yeah, yeah, we don't have that kind of support.
Right.
You have some guy like you have some guys that have money that like to be associated with it, but they'll have their favorite guy and take care of people, not like a blanket, like I'll take care of anybody in the sport kind of thing. And it's just that's not the way American mindsets work. That type of support should come from the UFC instead of making their executives billionaires. They should be dedicating some of that fight money to the infrastructure of the fighters that's still missing. We've highlighted a lot of it now
Yeah.
in this podcast.
It, it's so interesting that you brought that up, but that I hadn't even thought about that part of the problem. But it's becoming to where this region is swallowing not just the UFC, but the sport
Right.
whole.
And at its core, it has to do with the distribution of money that the UFC has established. That these guys are like t-shirt makers in a sweatshop in Bangladesh in terms of MMA fighters. MMA fighters in the US have a higher expectation of salary. They don't get it, they don't fight. And these guys will take that lower salary and be like, yeah, I can live on that. I'm good.
Yeah. It's fascinating, man. That whole part of that discussion. I don't think that discussion is being had by a lot of people elsewhere other than us. And I watched PFL their last show. They have a few guys that are incredible from that region. This guy
And I mean, I took guys to fight in Russia in '99, and I recognized just some of the same things that people are saying about what they would be capable of. And I recognize also that the athletes, yes, they get taken care of, but they're grateful of that. And they also have, like, for example, uh, Kadyrov is the boss. There's no doubt, right? And and Chimaev has to answer to him in that way also. So there's an elevation that they all do for each other. I watched um, a promoter I worked with in Russia, and well, actually I could tell so many stories, but I'll tell this one. Um, Ansar Chalangov, he was a leg lock guy, previous generation, but he was stud. I think he fought Dennis Hallman in the UFC. Um, he, fought my guy Strasser in Russia, and um, Strasser was mad, but we realized where we were, and these guys were Southern Russians. Chalangov is not a white Russian from, Slav from north of Russia. These guys are from Chechnya, Dagestan, those areas, and they used a different scale than Strasser did to weigh him. And Strasser did the job of cutting weight. And Strasser said, I felt immediately in the fight that the guy was way heavier than me. Um, so yeah, they'll do whatever they want. They'll do it, but that fighter, maybe he had to be told to not cheat, because if he had been told, I mean to cheat, because if he had been told make the weight, he would have made the weight. I had another fighter that the American he was fighting didn't make weight, like 1 or 2 pounds. And he's like, yeah, and he made the weight, so he said, yeah, let's make the weight. This is under Bodog. And the Russian promoter there, who kind of was flamboyant and liked to exercise his power, said, nah, he doesn't have to make weight. I'll tell my Russian fighter that that's okay. And he went, asked told the Russian guy, your opponent isn't going to make weight, but we're going to let him go. And the guy just said, yeah, okay, because the boss told him. So there is a different type of politics there that you have to understand. The fact is that the Russian promoter asked the wrong Russian fighter about whether it was okay his opponent made weight or not. And the guy fought 2 pounds overweight against a Russian guy that didn't even know the guy made it, because the Russian promoter asked a different guy. But I know it's a convoluted example, but it is the type of why these guys work hard, because they are at a certain point in respect, but the people that run things and the top people of respect have to be shown their respect, and you have to work hard for them, because you do not want to fall out of favor. It's and I think there's a similar dichotomy in Arab countries where, the boss is the boss. And in Saudi Arabia, everybody knows MLB is, if that's his name or whatever Prince Mohammed's name is. Everybody knows that if he says, everybody moves to make it happen. It's not like he's going to have some resistance and some people pulling in a different direction or anything like that. So yeah, you're dealing with a different level of motivation for the athletes. For them, it is life and death, because if I can't do this for a living, then I'm going to go do what?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also, I don't know if you had heard about this, but Fedor, he was critical of a show that Kadyrov had put on with some children's fights, maybe 7, 8 years old. And
Mm-hmm.
not long after that, his daughter got attacked on the way back home. His teenage daughter,
I hadn't heard of
Someone as
that.
powerful as Fedor, it didn't matter.
Yeah, and also there is and people may not be aware of this stuff, but Fedor is a Slav Russian. So Kadyrov crossed the line to attack one of Putin's guys, basically, kind of thing. So Kadyrov exercises a lot of power there, and he's very bold, and that makes him unpredictable and dangerous, also, which is why the fighters below him are feel pressure to perform, because they don't want to be the one that fails, and they've had success. So you have to keep that success going. You don't want to be the guy that knocks down your success.
Yeah. But I can see why, a lot of people are critical of Chimaev, but I mean, if you have that support, why would you not take advantage of it? You know?
Yeah, no, it might be dangerous to say no even.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm surprised
So
more American because a lot they take some of these American fighters over there that are managed by Ali. I'm surprised some of them don't try to take more advantage of his passion for MMA because they're not getting
it
support
may
here.
it may not be offered. It
Yeah,
may not
maybe
be
not.
offered.
Maybe not.
They go over there and they may get held for to a certain level, treated well, and this and that and the other stuff. Maybe a little bit of salary or some salary, good, maybe even good salary, but not here's a gift Mercedes Benz because you're good for my country.
Yeah, it's a fascinating discussion. Um, I think we should parlay into Bryce Mitchell a little bit. This is a topic that is kind of hot topic.
Well, we could tie it in. I'll tie it in
Yeah,
for you because I'll draw the thread here. This is a problem with once again the UFC's pay structure. If we've heard Bryce in interviews, and he's been successful in the UFC, he's done interviews and things like that. What on planet Earth makes him think that he can do a successful podcast and maybe have a few 100,000 followers in the future and stuff like that? This is not a guy that's a huge social media magnet, but why is he trying it? Because he's heard that if you can get to a couple 100,000 followers, you get a five, six, $7,000 check every month from Instagram. If you can be on YouTube, you get another check there, and you're supplementing your income because he's not making enough in his fights.
and he
So he
lives
made,
modestly too. He lives
yeah,
very modestly.
he's making, but he made a critical mistake in opening his mouth before letting people know that he was like Strickland did a good job of letting people know he was going to be controversial and capable of saying anything before he actually said a few things that kind of crossed the line. And that's kind of what people tried to cancel him as well, but he survived. Bryce doesn't have the pedigree on YouTube or Instagram or wherever there to survive this in all likelihood. I mean, I hope he does. But he opened his mouth, no savvy, no preparation for being an Instagram, probably no inclination to do it, or else he would have had his Instagram developing from the very start, like some of these guys.
Yeah,
But he probably needs the money, and he thought that this was a good idea. I would say that that's the essential thing that's at the core of this. Whatever his thoughts are, you don't know what your neighbors think or anything like that. There are people with wacky thoughts, and also people that say stupid shit all the time in our country, but not on social media, right? So yeah, I think and I like Bryce. I think he's a good fighter. I like Raleigh Delgado and
yeah,
Matt
yeah. I do
Hamilton, the
too.
guys that have been
Raleigh.
around
Yeah,
him too. Those guys all fought for me. They were all good soldiers and good and not only good fighters, but turned into lifelong martial artists. So it would be a shame to see them canceled or anything like that. Um, but yeah, this was a bad idea. This was a bad idea from the beginning, and I think that the reason for it was economics. Again, because the UFC fighters at a certain level don't make crap.
yeah, and I also think because he seemed to be getting more extreme in his viewpoints than when he first came in the UFC. He kind of said, "I'm a poor kid from Arkansas. People don't think we're worth anything." That was kind of his attitude at that time. I remember him saying that after one of his fights. But then he came in kind of like with the chemo thing. He had the Bible. He was holding it up and walking in the apex. Remember, and he screamed freedom. And he held. So he was kind of acting a little bit more different than he had initially. Initially, he just seemed like
Yeah,
someone
and
you'd meet from Arkansas or Oklahoma or anywhere else in this
look
Midwestern
again,
area.
and I don't want to knock him or anything like that any more than he's already been knocked. But come on, this is the thing. It's like people are like, "Oh, he's a Nazi." This guy, I would guarantee that he has not read Mein Kampf. You know what I mean? It's like it's like he hasn't studied the history of the Nazi Party. Details year by year, read Hitler speeches the way
Hmm.
Nazis or neo Nazis. You know that know the stuff that he's talking about, things he's heard and read at a superficial level, and he was probably just trying to be shocking.
Yeah, I think some of that too. That's what I was going to say. And we see this with a lot of MMA YouTubers, unfortunately. It seems like if you're serious, your growth is slow. If you come out and act like an idiot, even if you have no value to MMA at all, really, you have no
Yeah,
knowledge, you have no, as long as you're extreme, ridiculous, your
yeah,
channel's going to grow.
and remember, and Dana's changed a little bit. Dana took a question about keeping his fighters on a leash, and he went with the free speech, everybody can say what they want kind of saying, because that was good rhetoric at the time. How did that apply to Miguel Torres?
Right.
Because Miguel Torres made a kind of a joke that
Yeah.
was with very little taste back in the old days, and he got himself fired very fast.
Yeah.
So Dana's changed a little bit based on the current nature of politics in the world, in the country. So it's interesting, and Miguel Torres got himself canceled real fast too.
Hmm.
Uh, So a very fascinating situation for Bryce. I know that Dana came out and made statements about him, but he hasn't been let go, and I hope that he doesn't get let go. And I think the thing is the UFC may recognize that, um, clean him up a little bit, get him in the ring. He's a good fighter, so put him in. His next fight is going to attract a hell of a lot more eyes than his last fight did.
Yeah, even Dana White said that. You can watch him get beat up on TV. That's the great thing about the sport. You know, so he's
Yeah,
going to take advantage
so
of it for sure.
yeah, and that's kind of a new, like I said, that's kind of a new ruthlessness on the part of the UFC. Hopefully, Bryce gets enough money to put a down payment on a decent place and take care of his family. I think he's got
He doesn't
a
want
wife
to.
and kid.
He lives on a farm and he's got like a camper type, and that's where he lives and that's where he wants to be.
You know,
That's why I
then
said
I
he
hope.
lives modestly. It's not, at
No,
least
I knew,
it may not
I
be
know that.
about money for him, but I agree with you. The economics of it influences people's decisions when they make their podcasts.
Yeah, I know he likes to live he lives in a trailer and stuff. But again, it's cool to say, yeah, I'm happy, I'm comfortable here. But if you have been paid in his next fight, let's just say he makes $1 million for his next fight. You think he's not going to buy even just a smaller house, like but a normal house that won't get blown away by a tornado? Something a little better car. Some things he's missing now that he doesn't have, because again, if he's making 20 and 20, and this is the kid also, I'm not mistaken, right? He took a brutal knockout where he was like having spasms in the ring too, right?
He did.
So yeah, so he's leaving it all in the ring for real average pay. That fight would have broken a lot of people, because maybe he was making 30 and 30 for it. I doubt he's even at that pay level, but 30 and 30 same. So he goes into the fight obviously expecting to make 60. Instead, he's shown twitching on TV and highlight reels and made 30. And now has to pay trainers, taxes, et cetera, wound up with 15. You can't pay the bills even on where he lives now for a year with 15,000, but he may sit a year because of the nature of the injury, of the knockout. So yeah, this has everything to do with social economics, and these guys shouldn't have to. And I think the UFC encourages them. Get on Instagram, do Instagram. I want to see what your Instagram followers are. And the reason they do that is because the guys, now you get to the top level, you can still be paid less, because they can say, well, you're making money on Instagram. We enable you to make all this other money and stuff. I'm actually surprised that, as disgusting as Dana is with some of his attitudes, he doesn't try to actually say that, hey, Sean O'Malley, you get 1 million followers on Instagram, and you make 30,000 bucks a month off Instagram, or $20,000 a month off Instagram, or whatever it is. You need to give us a percentage of that money, because you wouldn't be. I'm actually surprised that they haven't tried that, because they've done it with everybody else.
Don't give him any ideas because that's probably coming if he hears this. You know.
Maybe they are actually doing it behind the scenes, but everybody keeps quiet. Maybe there's uh, a couple of lines in the contract that says, "Oh yeah, by the way, your Instagram money, we take 20%, And this is under a gag order. You can't tell anybody that we take any of the money.
Remember
And
they had
Rudy
that
Page
fighter
contracting.
they had that fighter symposium. They haven't had it since, but they had it. It was kind of early on, and I remember a lot of the fighters were posting things on Twitter about it, kind of negative actually. They were saying how boring it was. But one thing they did say when they were there, they were making them sign up for Twitter accounts. They were making them do it,
Yeah.
you know. And that was something interesting because that's when you started seeing all these fighters on Twitter, like just tons of them. And that,
Yeah, no, it's and again, I don't know if Twitter compensates. I don't know how they work that way, but again, Twitter's a way to get your stuff out there and your message out there, and they tie it into your Instagram account. Come visit me here, visit my YouTube channel, and that's the way some of these guys generate and become big. Have become people with big followings, and um, again, at some point, YouTube pays, Instagram pays, on TikTok. They don't pay out directly, but TikTok spread out to so many people, also internationally, that sponsors come to you if you have big followers on TikTok, and then all of a sudden you get these cheesy like pseudo commercials in their podcasts and things like that. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, again, I my belief is that the UFC encourages that for a couple of reasons. But first, it assists them in their media machine, but primarily it becomes another source of income for fighters, which means they can pocket more money and not compensate them directly for what they did.
And they used to show their social media handles when they walked out. I don't think they do that anymore. But it was something they were pushing around that symposium time, and it
Yeah,
that was something they were doing a lot of.
yeah, and I think maybe the reason to de-emphasize it is guys like Bryce Mitchell show it's not a good idea across the board. You kind of got to be selective of what guys are cut out for that sort of thing. Adesanya did a good job. There are other, you know, there are other fighters that once they get to a certain level do a good job, and then there are other fighters that you really don't emphasize that much on.
Yeah, yeah. Fascinating discussion as always. I really want to get into the Eastern European. We should do a whole show on that. Maybe get someone else to come in on that because I think it's something that we're talking about that a lot of people haven't picked up on yet, or maybe
Yeah,
don't want
I'd
to
be willing to
admit
talk.
is happening. I think there's some of that too. They don't want to admit it's
Yeah,
happening.
I think you can tell by Khabib and Islam and those guys at the top levels attitude about America and stuff like that. They realize that most people don't recognize or have any real knowledge of where they actually come from.
But I think a lot of fighters from other countries, the U.S., they don't want to admit that this is happening because that means they're less likely
Yeah,
to be successful.
at the end of the day, if you speak bad about the UFC and Dana hears about it, one way or another, you feel it.
Yeah, they could match make around it, sign less guys from that region. They could do some things to. But
They need to.
they
They
would be
need to.
artificial things.
And they need to support guys, young guys with talent more than they do now. Lifting the pay from 2,000 to 2,000 to 10,000 to 10,000 at the beginning still doesn't solve the problem of them continuing training at the highest level and upping their training and upping their nutrition and taking things to the next level and surviving an injury where you miss a fight on your contract or a scheduled fight, and all those types of things all play into messing up fighters' finances enough that most people aren't trying it.
I don't think the UFC cares. It's American capitalism. Let's make as much
Yeah,
and
yeah,
pay them
exactly.
as little as possible.
Absolutely. That's why the comparison to the sweatshop applies.
Well, Miguel, always fascinating discussion. Um, you guys can check out Miguel MMA underscore museum underscore podcast on Instagram. And it's always great to have him here. I'm always, even though I talk to him all the time, I'm always thrilled to talk to him about topics because this stuff like this comes up out of nowhere, kind of we
Yeah,
need
it's
to
always
offer 'em.
always fun to be on here, Todd, because you always push the envelope and give a forum to talk about things like you said that other people don't talk about. So that's what makes the Todd Atkins show the best podcast in MMA.
Our show, yeah, the MMA
Well,
Conspiracy
you
Hour.
got you've
Yeah,
got you've got a core nice
yeah,
contributors
yeah,
and people that do interviews and come on and stuff. So for sure, I'm glad to contribute.
yeah. Well, Miguel, as always, I appreciate your time. Everyone, subscribe, check us out. We got merchandise, we're starting to sell and stuff, which you can find in the show notes. And we always appreciate the support. Share our shows around if you believe in it. Share it with other fans. And as always, till next time, take care.
Hey guys, it's your girl Virgo Queen here, and you are watching the MMA Conspiracy Hour with Todd Atkins and Miguel Iturrate. Todd has been involved in covering the sport of mixed martial arts since the 1990s, and Miguel has been the matchmaker for over 200 events worldwide. Please subscribe to the channel and be on the lookout for future episodes. In the meantime, you can catch me here on TikTok at Virgo Queen, one and only. Thanks.